I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president had been using a stolen key to walk into my house without warning. Her excuse? If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. She had no idea that I'd soon rig my front door with a die trap that would turn her into a Smurf, on camera. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today. The air in the Hilton County Community Clubhouse always smelled like stale coffee and quiet desperation. It was the kind of beige windowless room where good ideas went to die. I sat in a flimsy metal chair that creaked every time I shifted my weight, which was often. My wife Sam sat beside me, scrolling on her phone, probably checking the perimeter cameras at home out of habit. We didn't want to be here. No one ever wanted to be at a homeowners association meeting, but skipping one was how you ended up with a 10-foot inflatable flamingo next door. Tonight, though, felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, something heavier than the usual bickering about lawn height or trash can visibility. It all centered on the woman at the podium, Karen Granson, HOA president, queen of the neighborhood, and a woman who seemed to draw energy from the misery of others. Her hair was a perfectly sculpted blonde helmet, her smile tight and cold, never reaching her calculating eyes. She tapped the microphone, the sound sharp and metallic, and the room went silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice coated in fake sweetness. "We have a few items on tonight's agenda, but I want to start with a new initiative for community safety and property value preservation." I nudged Sam. "Here we go," I muttered. "Prepare for the community beautification Gestapo." Sam smirked slightly without looking up. Karen lifted a clipboard like it was sacred scripture. "In light of recent reports of disorderly storage and potential fire hazards, the board is proposing a new bylaw. Bylaw 7C, routine garage integrity checks." Then she smiled. "Compliance isn't optional on my street." A ripple of uneasy murmurs moved through the 30 or so homeowners crammed into the room. My neighbor Dave, the local butcher and a nervous guy, raised a shaky hand. What does that mean, Karen?" Karen's smile sharpened like a blade. "Excellent question, David. It means that once a quarter, a certified board member will conduct a brief, scheduled inspection of every garage to ensure compliance with community standards. No excessive clutter. No unapproved modifications, no undeclared home businesses." I could feel my blood start to simmer. That slow rising heat that always came before my mouth got me in trouble. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. Karen loved power, and the one place she didn't have it was behind our closed doors. Now she was trying to break those doors down. Armed with a clipboard and a smile, before I even realized it, my hand shot up. Karen's eyes locked on me, her smile tightening just enough to show she recognized me, John Winters, the guy from 114 who planted tomatoes in his front yard until she cited him for unapproved agricultural activity. The guy who painted his front door a shade of blue. That was 1 hexadecimal code off from the approved palette. I was her favorite thorn, and we both knew it. "Yes, Mr. Winters," she said, emphasizing the title like I was a kid in the principal's office. "I have a question," I said, my voice louder than I meant. "Actually, it's more of a statement. The answer is no." The room fell silent. You could hear the old air conditioner rattling in the corner. Karen blinked. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question you're answering." "It's not a question," I said, standing up. I'm a big guy, not fat, just solid, and standing up in that cramped room made an impression. You're proposing that you, or one of your cronies, can enter my private property, my garage, my home, and I'm telling you right now the answer is no. You're not coming into my garage. Not quarterly. Not ever. I looked around. A few people nodded, subtle and nervous. Most just stared at their shoes, too scared to speak. Karen had fined people into debt for less. She laughed once. Short, sharp, fake. "Mr. Winters, this isn't a personal request. It's for the good of the entire community. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." That line, that smug, overused line, lit the fuse. "Oh, I'm not afraid, Karen," I said, my tone dropping into what Sam calls my "don't start with me" voice. "I'm just protective of my property, my privacy, and my right not to have a clipboard-wielding tyrant snooping around in my business. My garage is for my car, my tools, and my junk. It's not part of your little kingdom." The word tyrant hung in the air like smoke. Someone gasped. For a split second, her face twisted into pure rage. Then she smoothed it out, her expression sliding into one of cold pity. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said icily. "But the community's needs outweigh the peculiar desires of one individual. We'll now vote on Bylaw 7C. Of course it passed. Her 2 board lackeys voted yes, and a handful of terrified homeowners followed. Most abstained, which counted as yes. I stood there watching her, jaw tight. Sam tugged my sleeve. "Let's go, John." But I didn't move. Karen gathered her papers with a triumphant smirk. Her eyes met mine across the room, and that smirk deepened. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't no hard feelings. It was a promise of trouble. I had challenged her in public. And in Karen Granson's world, that meant war. We walked out of the clubhouse into the cool night air. The streetlights buzzed above us, casting long shadows across our quiet, picture-perfect neighborhood. But something in the air had shifted. "You really did it this time," Sam said, not angry, just resigned. She squeezed my hand. "I'll tighten up the network security when we get home." I nodded. I had won the battle of words, but deep down I knew it was just the beginning. Karen wasn't finished. The question wasn't if she'd strike back, only when. The next few days were eerily calm, the kind of silence that hums thick and expectant, like the air before a storm. I caught myself glancing out the window more often, watching every passing car, feeling that prickling sense that I was being watched. Sam called it paranoia. I called it preparation. Karen wasn't the kind of person who let public defiance slide. She was a planner, a schemer, and she was definitely planning something. It started small, a package marked delivered that never appeared on our porch. My morning newspaper, yes, I still read the paper, found tossed in the bushes. Petty moves, little reminders that she was thinking of me. "She's playing head games," Sam said one night, looking up from her laptop. Her corner of the living room was a fortress of screens and cables, our own digital command center. "She's trying to get under your skin." "It's working," I muttered, staring out across the street at Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. It felt like she was always out there. Sam's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Let's find out," she said. She pulled up the feeds from our 4 exterior cameras, one on the porch, one covering the driveway, and 2 watching the sides of the house. She rewound the past 3 days, the footage blurring as she fast-forwarded. Then we saw it, Karen's spotless white SUV. It drove past our house 4 times on Monday, 6 times on Tuesday, and once it parked at the edge of the neighborhood and sat there for 20 whole minutes before leaving. She wasn't just passing by. She was watching us. "Okay, so I'm not crazy," I said, a cold knot tightening in my gut. "It's borderline," Sam said, her tone grim. "But it's definitely targeted." We kept watching, scanning through another hour of footage. That's when something else caught my eye. A man I didn't recognize was walking down the sidewalk in broad daylight. Nothing unusual, just a guy out for a stroll. But as he reached our yard, he slowed down. His head turned toward the gas meter along the side of the house. He paused there, studying it for several seconds before moving on. "Who's that?" I asked. Sam zoomed in, but the image was too grainy to make out his face. "I don't know," she said. "Could be anyone." But it didn't feel random. Something about it was wrong. Then it hit me, like ice water running through my veins. 3 weeks earlier, we'd had a new central air unit installed. The contractors had worked over 2 days, coming and going while we were at work. They'd left one of those little metal lock boxes attached to the gas pipe, with a spare key to our front door inside. They were supposed to take it back when they finished. But they never did. I'd completely forgotten about it. "The lockbox," I whispered, already moving. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed for the side door. "John, what is it?" Sam called after me. "The key," I shouted. I fumbled with the latch on the side gate, shoved it open, and ran to the front of the house. My heart was hammering. The little gray lockbox was still there, hanging from the pipe. At first glance, it looked untouched. But when I punched in the contractor's code, the cover popped open, and my stomach dropped. It was empty. The spare key was gone. Fresh pry marks scarred the metal. Whoever did it had used tools. It wasn't random, it was targeted. The flashlight trembled in my hand as the truth came together piece by piece. Karen's surveillance. The strange man by the meter. She hadn't just sent someone to intimidate me. She'd sent someone to steal that key, To break open the box, take it, copy it, and slip it back without us ever knowing. But something must have gone wrong. He didn't put it back. Now she had a key to my house. The thought made me sick. My home, our sanctuary, had been violated. Every protective instinct in me ignited at once. This wasn't about bylaws or garage inspections anymore. This was personal. I stormed back inside, slamming the door behind me. "She has a key," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "That thief took the key from the lockbox." Sam's face drained of color. She spun toward her main computer, her hands flying across the keyboard. "The front door has a smart lock," she said, eyes wide with focus. "It logs every attempt, whether it's keyed or coded." She pulled up a new screen, a list of dates and times. "Here," she said, pointing. "Yesterday, 2:14 p.m., manual key entry attempt failed." My blood turned to ice. "Failed?" "The copy must have been bad," she said. "Or whoever made it was sloppy. It didn't work." But she knows that now. She'll try again with a better one. It wasn't a relief. It was a warning. She had already tried to walk into my home with a key in her hand. She'd failed once. She wouldn't fail twice. There were no more lines left to cross. She'd crushed them all. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was war, the old version of me, the quiet guy who just wanted to grill burgers and watch the game, was gone. What replaced him was something sharper, fiercer, fueled by pure protective rage. My home was my fortress, and its walls had been breached. Now it was time to rebuild stronger walls, and maybe dig a metaphorical moat, filled with something unpleasant for anyone foolish enough to try crossing it again. "Okay," I said, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "She has a key. We can change the locks, but that's just defense. That's waiting for her next move." "I'm done waiting." Sam was already ahead of me, her face lit by the glow of 3 monitors. "Changing the locks is step 1, she said. "Step 2 is proving she's the one behind this. We need evidence, undeniable, in-your-face proof. We catch her in the act." She turned toward me with a look I knew well, her beautifully devious plan expression. "We let her think she can get in," she said. "We bait the trap." My rage cooled into something sharper. Cold, focused determination. She was right. Just stopping Karen wasn't enough. She had to be exposed. We needed to drag her arrogance into the light for everyone to see. We had to catch her red-handed, or as it would soon turn out, blue-handed. My first stop was the internet. I spent hours researching non-lethal legal deterrence. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, tempting as that thought was. I wanted humiliation. Something harmless but unforgettable. Something that would shout, "I was here and I shouldn't have been." That's when I found it, a high-potency, non-toxic industrial-grade dye used in bank security systems. It came in several obnoxious colors, but one shade immediately caught my attention. A vivid, blinding cobalt blue. The description promised it was stubbornly persistent on fabric and skin for several days. Perfect. The next morning, I headed to the hardware store, filling my cart with a strange assortment of items: a small plastic bucket, thin fishing line, 2 eye hooks, and a factory bottle of non-toxic cobalt marking dye concentrate. No paint, no chemicals, nothing dangerous, just messy. The cashier gave me a curious look. "Big art project?" "Something like that," I said. Redecorating. Back in my garage, my sacred, uninspected garage, I got to work. I've always been a decent carpenter, a bit of a tinkerer, and this was the most satisfying project I'd taken on in years. The plan was simple, almost cartoonishly perfect. I mounted a small, spring-loaded shelf just inside the top of the front door frame, with the bucket perched neatly on top. A nearly invisible tripwire made from fishing line stretched across the base of the doorway, attached to the pin holding the shelf in place. When the door opened, the line would tug the pin, the shelf would drop, and whoever stood there would get an unexpected shower of bright blue justice. It was beautiful. Meanwhile, Sam was busy reinforcing our digital defenses. She installed 2 new high-definition cameras on the porch, both hardwired to a private recording server with a battery backup. One was obvious, mounted directly over the door. The other was cleverly hidden inside a fake sprinkler head in the flower bed, giving us a perfect low-angle view. Between that, the doorbell cam, and the porch cam, every angle was covered. "We're not just catching her," Sam said, threading cables through the wall. "We're producing a movie." The last piece was the legal one. I wasn't about to get myself into trouble over this. I printed a new sign, big, bold, and impossible to miss. In glaring red letters it read, "Private property, no trespassing. All unlawful entries will be documented. Violators will be met with non-lethal deterrence." It was ugly as sin, but it was airtight. I bolted it right next to the door. Then I filed a report with Hilton County PD describing the situation and getting a case number, just in case. No one could say they weren't warned. Once everything was in place, the house felt different. It wasn't just a home anymore, it was a fortress. A fortress waiting for a siege. We didn't change the front door lock. That was the bait. We needed her to believe her stolen key still worked. Every night we checked the tripwire. Every morning we reviewed the footage. For 3 days, nothing. Silence. The waiting started eating at me. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe she'd backed off. Then came the 4th day. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my phone buzzed. A notification from Sam. It wasn't a text. It was a live camera feed. My heart leapt into my throat. I tapped the link. The screen filled with a crystal clear view of our front porch. And there she was, Karen Granson. She stood there in a crisp white pantsuit, clutching her clipboard like a badge of authority. That smug, self-satisfied look was painted all over her face. She glanced left, then right, checking to see if anyone was watching. She didn't see the little black dome camera aimed right at her. She didn't see the fake sprinkler head staring up from the flower bed. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My key. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling. Her Highness was about to step into her very own cobalt coronation. My hand shook so hard I could barely hold the phone. Sam sent me a text with a single word. Showtime. I could feel the grin behind it, on screen. Karen smirked at the bright red no trespassing sign beside the door, her lip curling in disdain. Rules to her were for other people. Clearly thought the sign was just a bluff, an act of desperation from the man who had dared to challenge her authority. She had no idea she was seconds away from becoming the star of a short, very colorful film. She slid the key into the lock. My pulse thundered in my ears. What if the key didn't turn? What if the mechanism jammed? But then, click. The tumbler turned. The handle twisted. The door creaked open. For half a second, nothing happened. Then she stepped forward, her expensive white shoe crossing the threshold into my home. Her foot caught the fishing line. The movement was instant, pure physics at work. The line jerked the pin free, the spring-loaded shelf tilted forward, and gravity did the rest. The bucket tipped. A full gallon of concentrated cobalt blue dye cascaded downward in one glorious wave. It wasn't a splash. It was a waterfall. It hit her dead on. Head, shoulders, and all. Her pristine white suit disappeared under a tidal wave of blue. Petty? Maybe. Cruel? Not at all. It was safe, harmless, and incredibly satisfying. Her perfectly styled blonde hair turned an electric shade of Smurf blue. The dye soaked through her suit, dripping down her face and clipboard, pooling around her expensive heels on the welcome to our home mat tutted the camera hidden in the sprinkler. Head caught every detail in perfect high definition. Silent film of emotions. First came shock. Her eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O. Then came confusion as her brain tried to catch up. Finally, when the cold, sticky dye soaked through her pristine suit, rage took over. Pure, unfiltered fury, twisting her face into an ugly snarl. She let out a shriek so sharp it could have cracked glass 2 blocks away. Karen stumbled backward, slipping on the slick porch. Her arms flailed wildly, splattering blue dye across the siding, the steps, and even the bright red warning sign. Her clipboard, the mighty symbol of her authority, slapped into the puddle with a wet smack. The papers inside bloomed into an abstract, blue Rorschach test. The whole thing lasted less than 5 seconds. Fortunately, Sam had the cameras recording on a continuous loop. Every glorious frame was captured from 3 angles and automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server. Evidence secured. The aftermath, though, was the real masterpiece. Our neighbor Nate, retired, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted to his prize-winning petunias, had been out front watering his flowers. He saw everything. The driveway camera caught his reaction. His jaw dropped, His watering can clattered to the pavement and he just stood there frozen. After a long pause, he slowly turned around, walked back into his house, and quietly closed the door. He didn't need to say a word. Karen, meanwhile, was in full meltdown mode. She tried to wipe the dye from her eyes, only smearing it deeper across her face. She looked like a cartoon villain who'd just lost the big finale. Then she looked up and saw it, the main camera. The little red recording light blinking above the door she'd just broken into. Her expression shifted from rage to sheer panic. She realized she'd been caught. She'd been played. She pointed a dripping blue finger at the camera. "You," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this, Winters. You'll regret this." Then she stomped off the porch, leaving a trail of cobalt blue footprints down the walkway and across the once pristine sidewalk. She yanked open the door of her white SUV, now marked with bright blue smears, and peeled out of the neighborhood, tires squealing. Inside, I finally exhaled the breath I'd been holding, and it came out as laughter, real uncontrollable laughter. Sam walked in from her office, grinning from ear to ear. "Did you see it?" I asked, wiping tears from my face. "It was beautiful," she said, holding up her phone. "And it's already trending on the neighborhood watch page." I titled it, "Local HOA President Caught Blue-Handed." The video exploded instantly. The comment section was flooded with laughing emojis and stories from neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Karen. For a few hours, it felt like total victory. But when I replayed the footage of her driving off, I saw her face in that final frame. That wasn't the look of defeat. It was the look of someone plotting revenge. The war wasn't over. It had just entered round 2. The video's viral success was a double-edged sword. Watching Karen's blue baptism was immensely satisfying, but it had also backed her into a corner. And a cornered Karen was dangerous. Her retaliation wasn't subtle. It came hard and fast. The first strike arrived through the mail slot, a thick envelope from the Hilton County HOA. Inside was a stack of violation notices. There was a $500 fine for unapproved exterior alterations, referring to the blue dye still on the siding. A $750 fine for creating a hazardous condition on a community walkway, meaning her own footprints. And the best one, $1,000 for harassment of a board member, over $2,000 in total. "She can't be serious," I said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table. "We have video proof she trespassed." "It's not about being right," Sam replied, her tone tight. "It's about making our lives miserable. She's using the HOA's resources to bury us in fines and legal fees." That was just the opening salvo. 3 nights later, she escalated. It was just after midnight when the house went completely dark. The hum of the fridge, the soft glow of the router, all gone. I grabbed my phone. The screen was blindingly bright in the sudden darkness. The outage map showed only one affected home. Ours. Before I could even react, a low hum echoed from the basement as our backup generator kicked in. Emergency lights flickered on. Sam was already at her workstation, the blue glow of her monitors lighting her face. "The main power line was manually disconnected at the street box," she said. "Someone had to open it and pull the breaker." The next morning, I called the power company. The representative cheerfully informed me that the outage was a requested disconnection, filed by our property management company. Our HOA Karen had impersonated a manager to cut our power in the middle of the night. That wasn't petty. That was dangerous. If we hadn't had a generator, or if it were winter, things could have gone very differently. But she wasn't done. The following evening, we were watching a movie when the screen froze. Then the buffering symbol appeared. My phone lost Wi-Fi. Sam's eyes narrowed. "We're being jammed," she said. She grabbed a handheld scanner and walked through the house, following the signal strength. It peaked near the front yard. I grabbed the mag light and followed her outside. In the azalea bush near the porch, half buried in the dirt, was a small black box with a blinking red light, a portable, high-powered Wi-Fi jammer. It wasn't store-bought. It was specialized tech. We filmed everything, bagged the device using gloves, and filed reports with both the police and the FCC. This was planned, coordinated, costly. While I was still holding the jammer, Sam froze and grabbed my arm. "John," she whispered. "Look." A large man was walking up the street toward our house, broad-shouldered, shaved head, wearing a dark jacket with a logo. Gus's handyman services. Can I help you? I asked, stepping in front of Sam, gripping the flashlight tight. He stopped just outside the glow of the porch light. I'm here to inspect some illegal modifications on your porch, he grunted. Board president sent me. It's 1 a.m, I said, my voice steady. You're trespassing. Leave now. I've got a work order, he replied, taking a step onto the grass. I'm not leaving until I've done my inspection. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just playing HOA games anymore. She'd declared a full-scale war, and this time I wasn't planning to lose. Karen's goon standing on my lawn was the last straw. Normally, I keep my temper in check, simmering, not boiling. But that night it boiled over. You take one more step onto my property, I said, my voice low and trembling with anger, and you'll be meeting the police. He let out a short, ugly laugh. The police? Karen owns them. Now get out of my way. He lunged forward, not to hit me but to shove past me toward my porch. My instincts kicked in. I wasn't letting this mountain of a man anywhere near my wife or my home. I planted my feet and pushed back hard. He stumbled, surprise flashing across his face before it twisted into a snarl. You put your hands on me? He growled, fists tightening. For a split second I thought he'd swing. We stood there face to face, neither willing to back down. Then behind me came the unmistakable sound of Sam racking the shotgun. Muzzle down, finger clear, safety on. A warning, not a threat, the goon froze. His eyes flicked toward the doorway and I saw his confidence vanish. He took one slow step backward. This isn't over, he spat, pointing a thick finger at me. Karen always gets what she wants. Then he turned and lumbered off into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding. The Wi-Fi jammer still clutched in my hand. The game had changed. This wasn't about petty HOA fines anymore. It was a coordinated campaign of intimidation. Cutting our power, sabotaging our internet, and now sending a hired thug to our door at 1 a.m. But they'd made a critical mistake. They hadn't broken us. They'd just made us angry, and they had no idea what an angry man, and his even angrier tech-savvy wife, were capable of. The scuffle with Gus was the turning point. The part of me that just wanted peace and quiet was gone. Karen Granson had crossed a line. This wasn't harassment anymore, it was a declaration of war. The only question now was, how do we end this for good? We sat in our command center, the office that used to be cozy but now looked like the nerve center of a surveillance operation. The tension was thick. The humor of the blue dye prank had evaporated, replaced by cold determination. She's using a proxy, Sam said, typing furiously. That guy, Gus, gives her plausible deniability. We can't prove she sent him. Then we connect them, I said. Catch them working together and make sure they never see it coming. Our current camera setup was good, but we'd learned its weakness. If they cut the power or jammed the Wi-Fi, we were blind. That had to change. Sam, brilliant, fearless, and a little terrifying when she got focused, already had a plan. We're building a new network, she said. A ghost network. For the next 2 days, our house transformed into a fortress. Sam ordered a new line of cameras, not Wi-Fi based, but powered by 4G cellular signals. Each had its own battery pack, good for 72 hours, and could stream independently. They were small, discreet, and impossible to knock offline. One went inside a birdhouse mounted in the old oak tree. Another disguised as a rock in the flower bed. A third with a zoom lens in the attic window, giving us a perfect sniper's eye view of the street. Then came the real magic, the encrypted mesh network. Unlike a traditional router, a mesh system used multiple connected nodes that constantly talked to each other. If one went down, the others rerouted the signal automatically. It was self-healing, resilient, and nearly impossible to jam completely. By the end of day 2, our digital fortress was complete. Now it was time to bait the trap. She's after something inside, I reasoned. The garage checks the stolen keys. She thinks we're hiding something. Sam smiled. Then let's give her something to find. We bought a cheap fireproof safe, black, heavy, and very official looking. I set it in the garage with the door wide open, for any prying eyes to see. Then I made a show of filling it with valuables. A few bricks wrapped in bubble wrap for weight. An old laptop and a bag of bolts to make it rattle just right. The final touch was pure genius. A tiny GPS-enabled RFID tracker, no bigger than a coin, hidden inside the padding. It would ping Sam's phone every 60 seconds once activated. The bait was ready. Now we just had to make sure. Karen took it. That's where our neighbor Nate came in. I caught him trimming his hedges the next morning. "Hey, Nate," I said, leaning over the fence. "Can you do me a favor? Keep an eye on the house for a few days. With all the chaos going on, I've had to, move some valuables home. From the bank. Just until things calm down." Nate's eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, John, of course. My lips are sealed." They weren't. Nate's lips were about as sealed as a screen door in a hurricane. By lunchtime, the entire neighborhood would know that John Winters, was keeping important valuables in a safe at home. And if the neighborhood knew, Karen knew. Sam called it Karen Nip, a locked box, rumored to be full of treasure and off limits to her prying hands. She wouldn't be able to resist. That Friday, we put the plan into motion. We dressed up, announced to Nate that we were heading out for a fancy anniversary dinner and 6 months early, and drove off waving cheerfully. We circled the block, parked on a side street with a perfect view of our house, and pulled up the live feed from our new cameras on Sam's tablet. Above us, the Wasp, Sam's small photography drone, hovered silently at 200 feet, giving us a bird's-eye view of everything. For the first hour, nothing happened. The house was quiet. I started to fidget. "Maybe she didn't take the bait," I whispered. "Patience," Sam said, eyes locked on the screen. "A predator always circles before it strikes." At 9:47 p.m., a dark windowless van with no logos crept into the neighborhood and parked a few houses down. The engine cut. My pulse spiked. A minute later, the passenger door opened, and a large figure stepped out. Even in the grainy night vision, his lumbering gait was unmistakable. Gus. He moved like a shadow, staying close to the fences, eyes scanning. Then he slipped into our backyard. On the camera feed, we watched him pry open the kitchen window with a crowbar and disappear inside. I gripped the dashboard, every muscle tense. 5 minutes later, the back door opened again. Gus emerged, dragging the heavy decoy safe across the lawn. He wrestled it into the van, slammed the doors, and drove off into the night. My first instinct was rage. He'd broken into our home again. Then Sam held up her phone. On the screen, a small blue dot blinked steadily on a map, moving down the road. "Away from our house, got him," she said, a sharp, satisfied grin spreading across her face. "The tracker's live." The trap had been sprung, and now all we had to do was follow the breadcrumbs. The adrenaline from the break-in kept us wired through the night. We didn't sleep. Our home office had turned into a war room. Sam projected the live map from the RFID tracker onto the wall, a glowing blue dot marking our stolen safe, now on the move. I set up a massive whiteboard, the kind you see in detective movies, and started scribbling notes, drawing connections, and piecing together the twisted web of Karen Granson's criminal operation. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was an investigation. Our first clue was the tracker itself. The safe didn't end up at a storage unit or at Gus's place like we'd assumed. Instead, the blue dot crossed town and stopped in a commercial strip, known for bail bonds, payday loans, and 24-hour check-cashing joints. It froze at one specific address. Sam typed it into a search bar. The result popped up instantly. "Honest Abe's Pawn and Loan, we buy anything." "He took it straight to a pawn shop," I muttered, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. He couldn't even wait a day. He's not just a thug, he's a stupid thug. By morning, we were parked across from Honest Abe's before it opened. The place looked straight out of a cliché, barred windows, flickering neon, and years of bad decisions clinging to the air. We waited 30 minutes for the owner to settle in before walking inside. The shop smelled like dust and desperation. Behind the counter stood a greasy man with a ponytail, Abe himself, who eyed us with bored suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked flatly. I smiled, friendly but firm. "Good morning. We're here about a safe, Black Sentry brand, brought in last night by a large man." Abe's face went blank. "Don't know what you're talking about." Without a word, Sam pulled out her phone and set it on the counter. She hit play. On screen, Gus's face filled the frame, clear as day, hauling our safe across the lawn. "This is video evidence of a felony burglary," Sam said, calm and professional. "That safe is our property, and it has a GPS tracker that led us right to your door. Now you have two choices. Cooperate, and this stays simple, or don't, and the Hilton County Police will be here with a warrant and footage showing you receiving stolen goods. Your call. Abe swallowed hard, his eyes darting between us and the phone. Then he nodded. Smart man. He led us to the back rooms, and there it was. Our decoy safe, sitting between a dusty saxophone and a pile of old power tools. Abe handed over a property receipt and even copied his security footage to a drive for the police. It was perfect. Clear video of Gus dragging the safe in and even clearer proof of the cash exchange. We had Gus cold, but he was just muscle. We needed Karen. That's when Sam remembered the die trap footage. Back home, she pulled up the high-resolution file. Watch the clipboard, she said, zooming in frame by frame on the moment the blue dye exploded. The liquid didn't just hit Karen, it splattered everywhere. And there it was, a perfect starburst of cobalt blue staining the corner of her fancy leather-bound planner. A fingerprint in ink. That's something, I said. But how do we prove she still has it? Sam just grinned. Because our dear HOA president is a narcissist, and narcissists love social media. She opened the HOA's Facebook page, a nauseating highlight reel of Karen cutting ribbons, planting petunias, and grinning beside oversized charity checks. Sam scrolled back a few days and froze. There, she said. A photo from a bake sale 2 days ago, Karen smiling that same fake smile, holding the planner. And in the lower corner, barely visible but unmistakable, was that same blue starburst stain. We had her. Now we needed to show the pattern, the human cost of her power. I spent the next 2 days knocking on doors, just talking to people. Most were hesitant, afraid, terrified of fines, retaliation, or losing utilities. Then I met Mrs. Gable, a kind widow from the next street over. When I told her what happened, she broke down crying. She told me how Karen had ordered an attic inspection last winter. Gus went up alone and claimed to find serious code violations. He charged her $3,000 for repairs that probably amounted to kicking some dust around. She was too frightened and ashamed to tell anyone. Her story was the key. Once Mrs. Gable agreed to give a written statement, others began to open up. A young couple fined $1,000 because their toddler's tricycle was left on the driveway for 2 hours. A man forced to tear down his new deck because Karen said the wood stain looked too rustic. Within days, we'd gathered half a dozen signed notarized statements. On our whiteboard, the picture was complete. The burglary footage, the tracker data, the pawn shop's video, the planner with the blue stain, and now witness statements detailing a pattern of extortion and intimidation. It was airtight. I was ready to call the police. But Sam stopped me. They'll file a report, she said, eyes blazing. Then it'll disappear into red tape for years. She doesn't need a court date. She needs to be removed from power, now. She reached for the thick binder of HOA bylaws, flipping through its dusty pages. And I think I know how. She pulled out the thick binder of HOA bylaws and flipped through the pages. I think I know how to do it, she said, her finger stopping on a dusty, forgotten clause. Article 9. Emergency removal of a board member. It required a petition signed by 25% of homeowners to force a special recall meeting. It was time to take the fight back to the clubhouse. Getting that many signatures against a sitting HOA president is like trying to nail jelly to a tree. People were scared, afraid of retaliation, afraid their trash cans would suddenly be declared non-compliant or their award-winning roses would somehow break code. But fear can cut both ways, and Karen Granson had spread plenty of it around. As it turned out, so could righteous anger. When people heard Mrs. Gable's story, something changed. Intimidating me was one thing. I could handle it. But extorting a sweet elderly widow? That crossed a line even for our cautious little community. The signatures poured in faster than we dared to hope. We needed 40. We got 62. When I held that signed petition in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Confidence. We weren't just victims anymore. We were leading a rebellion. Sam drafted the official notice for the emergency recall meeting, citing the bylaw and the purpose of the vote. We posted it right on the community bulletin board, directly over a flyer for Karen's upcoming patriotic pet parade. The date was set, Thursday. The night of the meeting, the beige community clubhouse looked nothing like its usual self. It was packed, standing room only. The air, usually thick with boredom, now crackled with tension. Neighbors who had never once shown up to a meeting lined the walls, arms crossed, faces tight with fear and determination. Sam and I sat in the front row. Nate gave me a thumbs up from across the room. Mrs. Gable was there too, sitting beside a few other residents who looked both nervous and resolute. At the head table sat Karen, flanked by her two ever-present lackeys Barry and Linda. They looked rattled. She clearly hadn't expected this kind of turnout. She slammed her gavel, forcing a thin smile. "Welcome to this unscheduled gathering," she began, her voice clipped. "Due to a frivolous and frankly misguided petition, we are legally obligated to hold this meeting. Let's get this nonsense over with," I stood. "According to the bylaws, Karen, the petitioners get to speak first." As I walked to the podium, the papers in my hand felt heavier than stone. Every eye in the room followed me. "My name is John Winters," I began, keeping my voice steady. "For the past month, my family has been targeted by our HOA president. We've been stalked, harassed, and robbed, and we are not the only ones." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Karen shot up, furious. "That is a slanderous accusation. You have no proof." "Oh, I have proof," I said calmly, looking out across the room. "But before we get to that, let's talk about why we're here. This board has forgotten who it serves. It doesn't work for Karen Granson's ego. It works for us, the homeowners. When it uses our money and our rules to intimidate and extort, it breaks our trust." Karen banged the gavel again. "Point of order. This is not a trial. State the reason for the recall or sit down." I ignored her. Turning toward Mrs. Gable, I said, "Would you be willing to share what happened to you?" The elderly woman stood, trembling but brave. In a quiet, steady voice, she told everyone about the attic inspection, about Gus, and about the $3,000 she paid in fear and silence. When she finished, the room went still. Then from the back, someone shouted, "Shame!" The dam broke. People began shouting over one another, stories of fines, threats, and constant surveillance. It was years of frustration boiling over all at once. Karen's face went pale. Her mask of composure cracked. She looked trapped, desperate. Then she made her move. She gave a sharp nod toward the back of the room. A massive figure stepped out of the shadows. "Gus." He started marching toward me. "This meeting is out of control," Karen shouted over the chaos. "This man is a threat to the board's safety." "Gus, escort Mr. Winters out." But Gus wasn't used to facing a room full of angry homeowners. He hesitated, glancing between me, the crowd, and Karen. "Get him out of here," she screamed. Gus reached for my arm, and that's when a cane shot out from the side, hooking his ankle. Nate. Even he looked surprised. Gus hit the floor like a collapsing building, crashing into a table of lukewarm coffee and powdered donuts. Chaos erupted. Barry rushed to help him and got shoved by Dave, the quiet neighbor from the first meeting who apparently found his backbone. Linda started screaming. It was a full-blown suburban riot. I stood at the podium and just watched it unfold. Karen had lost control of the room, of the board, of her power. By the time things settled, the vote was officially scheduled, as per the bylaws, to take place in 10 days, at the annual neighborhood block party. As people began filing out, Karen forced her way through the crowd until she stood right in front of me. Her face was twisted with pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes burned. "You think you've won?" she hissed, low enough for only me to hear. "You have no idea what's coming for you, Winters. This isn't over." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And in that moment, looking into her eyes, I knew Karen Granson was far more dangerous now than ever before. Her words hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud for the next 10 days. The usual excitement for the block party was gone, replaced by dread and nervous anticipation. We knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. She was planning something, a final desperate move to crush the rebellion and keep her throne. This time it wasn't just about defending our home. We were leading a neighborhood uprising. Sam's office became our command center. We held quiet meetings after dark. Neighbors huddled in our living room like a secret resistance. The plan we built was bold, theatrical, and if it worked, it would be the final nail in Karen Granson's coffin. It was Sam's masterpiece. Her theme was simple: more blue. "She wants to play dirty," Sam said, pointing at the block party map on the whiteboard. "So we'll drown her in it, in front of 100 witnesses and a dozen cameras." The operation was an upgraded version of our original die trap. We picked 4 houses with second-story porches overlooking the main street, where the voting table would be set up. Every family volunteered without hesitation. They'd all suffered under Karen's rule. I spent 2 days in the garage, building 4 identical remote-controlled tipping mechanisms, each rigged to release 5 gallons of that same cobalt blue dye. The buckets were hidden behind porch railings, completely invisible from the ground. Sam linked all 4 mechanisms to a single wireless trigger, a big red button sitting innocently on the table at our barbecue station. But the real brilliance wasn't just the trap. It was the broadcast. Sam didn't want this to be just a neighborhood spectacle. She wanted it to be undeniable, a public record that no one could twist or deny. She set up a private live stream with a unique URL. That link went out to local news outlets, a few community bloggers, and every homeowner in the association, with a simple message: tune in at 2 p.m. sharp for a special announcement regarding the HOA recall vote. She had cameras everywhere. The WASP drone would hover overhead. Tiny hidden lenses were tucked inside tiki torches, bird feeders, even a gnome in Nate's garden. We would capture everything, every second, every angle. When the day of the block party arrived, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a plastic picnic knife. The smell of barbecue mixed with something sharper, the scent of an approaching storm. Kids laughed in the bouncy castle, blissfully unaware of the showdown brewing around them. The voting table stood in the middle of the street, run by a neutral third party, retired city clerk Ms. Rios. She oversaw sealed ballot boxes and a public tally sheet, ensuring everything stayed fair. At 1:55 p.m., Karen arrived. She wasn't alone. Flanked by Gus and her 2 loyal board members, Barry and Linda, she moved through the crowd like a wolf pack, grim, cold, and purposeful. They weren't there to vote. They were there to intimidate. They prowled through the crowd whispering threats, glaring at anyone who approached the ballot box. From the grill, I watched, one hand flipping burgers, the other resting inches from the big red button under the table. Inside the house, Sam was at her command post, monitoring the feed and talking to the bucket teams through discreet earpieces. All cameras live, her voice buzzed in my ear. Streams at over 500 viewers and climbing. WASP is in position. Buckets ready on your signal. Karen and her crew moved into position right beneath the porches. The kill zone. They're in position, I whispered, feeling the surge of adrenaline. I waited. Karen slammed her hand on the voting table. This entire vote is illegal, she screeched. This is a sham. That was my cue. I glanced at Sam through the window. She gave me a single sharp nod. I pressed the button. 200 feet above, the WASP's camera zoomed in. On 4 porches, solenoids clicked, pins released, and then the buckets tipped. 20 gallons of cobalt blue dye rained from the heavens. It was a blue monsoon. Karen, Gus, Barry, and Linda didn't even have time to look up. In an instant, they were drenched, completely soaked in shimmering electric blue. The crowd gasped. One collective intake of breath. Then, for a moment, silence. 4 figures stood in the middle of the street, dripping and stunned, looking like they'd just wiped out a family of Smurfs. Then came the laughter. Not just giggles, waves of laughter. Pure cathartic release from 100 people who'd been living under fear for too long. Karen sputtered, blue dye dripping from her nose. Gus just stood there bewildered, as if the sky itself had betrayed him. As the laughter echoed through the block and the live stream viewer count climbed into the thousands, 2 Hilton County police cruisers rolled up silently at the end of the street. Detective Miller stepped out, a stack of warrants in hand. I'd briefed him days earlier, told him 2:09 p.m. might get a little ventful. I walked over and handed him a flash drive. Everything you need is on there, I said. Backups are already in evidence. Video of the break-in, pawn shop transactions, witness intimidation, extortion, notarized statements. The whole package. Miller looked from the flash drive to the 4 dripping, blue-stained culprits, then back at me. He shook his head and smirked. John, you don't do anything halfway, do you? Moments later, they cuffed Karen, still shrieking, right there in the middle of the street, in front of all her neighbors and thousands watching online. It was over. We'd won. But as they led her to the police car, she turned and locked eyes with me. There was no fear, no remorse, and only burning hatred. That look said it all. This isn't over. The neighborhood would later call it the Blue Apocalypse. With Karen, Gus, and their cronies soaked in dye and buried under evidence, the HOA's grip snapped overnight. While Karen was being booked, the recall vote went forward, nearly unanimous. The old board was out. A new interim board stepped in. To my surprise, I was on it. Our first motion: void every fine Karen's board had issued over the past year and refund every dollar from reserves. Passed and no objections. The cheer that filled that beige clubhouse rattled the ceiling tiles. Months later, after hearings and filings, the criminal case wrapped up. Gus flipped, trading testimony for a lighter sentence. Barry and Linda faced civil suits from half the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable led the charge. They settled, sold, and vanished. No one missed them. Karen took a plea: county time, probation, heavy fines, and a 5-year ban from serving on any HOA board in Hilton County. We had done it. We took apart her little empire. Piece by piece, the neighborhood changed fast. Fear drained away. In its place came something better: conversation, laughter, community. Hedges got trimmed together. Grills were shared. Potlucks popped up like mushrooms after rain. Ironically, the block party that almost turned into a riot became the thing that brought us all back together. Then came the tribute. Little blue-painted garden gnomes began appearing on lawns, one by one. Nate started it. We followed. A month later, 100 tiny blue smiles watched over our street. It was part joke, part vow. We look out for each other. Life finally quieted down. Sam and I got the peace we'd moved here for. Coffee tasted better. The grass grew without a warning letter. I could tinker in my garage without expecting an integrity check. Sometimes I'd think about everything that happened: the traps, the cameras, the petitions, the sting. And I felt a tired, proud calm. I didn't ask for a war, but if one shows up at your door, you finish it. We protected our home and our people, and that feeling runs deep. A few months later, the sun set gold over the neighborhood and its army of blue gnomes. I grabbed the mail, shut the box, and felt something tacky on the handle. I looked down. Cobalt blue smeared across my thumb. My stomach dropped. I leaned closer. On the metal handle, perfectly pressed into the wet smear, was a single, clean fingerprint. Not mine. Too small for Gus. Too small for Karen, who was still locked up. The envelope slipped from my hand, slapping the driveway. The air suddenly felt colder. The blue wasn't random. It was a message, a calling card. Somebody else had been here. Someone tied to the mess we thought we'd already cleaned up. Someone with access. We'd cut off the head, but we'd missed a fang. The war was over. We'd won the peace. The street felt healed. But that one cobalt print said another round might be waiting for the bell. I went inside. Sam was already at her desk, quick as a blink. "Mailbox cam," she said. We rolled the footage back frame by frame. She paused, zoomed in, and tapped the screen. "That print wasn't accidental," she murmured. "It was placed." I looked at the reflection in the window on a row of tiny blue gnomes, each one grinning in the dying light. Game on. I recently faced my worst nightmare. The HOA president kept using a stolen key to enter my house, unannounced, and her excuse: "If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear." Little did she know I'd rigged my door with a die trap that would turn her into a Smurf on camera. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from today. The air in the Hilton County Community Clubhouse always smelled like stale coffee and quiet desperation. It was the kind of beige windowless room where good ideas went to die. I sat in a flimsy metal chair that groaned every time I shifted, which was often. Beside me, my wife Sam scrolled through her phone, probably checking the perimeter cameras at home. We didn't want to be there. Nobody ever wanted to be at a homeowners association meeting. But skipping them, that's how you ended up with a surprise 10-foot flamingo ordinance. Tonight, though, felt different. There was tension in the air, a nervous kind that had nothing to do with trash cans or lawn height. All eyes were on the woman at the podium, Karen Granson, HOA president, self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, and a woman who seemed to draw her power from other people's misery. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a perfect helmet, her smile frozen, her eyes cold and calculating. She tapped the microphone, a sharp metallic echo, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have a few items on the agenda tonight, but I want to start with a new initiative for community safety and property value preservation." I nudged Sam. "Here we go," I muttered. "Prepare for the community beautification Gestapo." Sam smirked without looking up. Karen held up a clipboard like a sacred relic. "In light of recent reports of disorderly storage and potential fire hazards, the board is proposing a new bylaw. Bylaw 7C, routine garage integrity checks." Her smile widened. "Compliance isn't optional on my street." A low murmur spread through the crowd of 30 or so homeowners. My neighbor Dave, a good guy, nervous by nature, raised a hand. What does that mean, Karen?" She beamed, spotting weakness. "Excellent question, David. It means that once a quarter, a certified board member will conduct a brief scheduled inspection of all garages to ensure compliance. No excessive clutter, no unapproved modifications, and no undeclared home businesses." My blood started to simmer, that low, slow burn that always comes before my mouth gets me into trouble. This wasn't about safety. It was about power. Karen loved power, and the only place she didn't have it was behind our closed doors. Now she wanted in, clipboard in hand, smile sharp as a knife. My hand went up before I even thought about it. Her eyes found me immediately, and her smile tightened. She knew me well. John Winters, the guy in 114, the one she'd fined for planting tomatoes in the front yard, the guy who painted his door one shade darker than her precious approved palette, a thorn in her side, and I think we both secretly enjoyed it. "Yes, Mr. Winters," she said, stretching the title like a teacher scolding a child. "I have a question," I said, though it came out louder than I intended. "Actually, it's more of a statement." The answer is no. The room went silent. Even the old air conditioner stopped rattling. Karen blinked. "I'm sorry. What question are you answering?" "It's not a question," I said, standing up. "I'm a big guy, not fat, just solid. Standing in that cramped room had an effect. You're proposing that you, or one of your cronies, gets to enter my private property, my garage, my home. And I'm telling you right now, the answer is no. You're not coming into my garage, not quarterly, not ever." A few people nodded, careful not to let her see. Most just stared at their shoes. Everyone knew what Karen could do with a clipboard and a grudge. She gave a short, sharp laugh. "Mr. Winters, this isn't personal. It's for the good of the entire community. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." That line, that tired, smug line, was the spark. "Oh, I'm not afraid, Karen," I said, my voice dropping into what Sam calls my "don't start with me" tone. "I'm protective and of my privacy, my property, and my right not to be ruled by a petty tyrant with a clipboard. My garage is for my car, my tools, and my junk. It's not part of your little kingdom." The word tyrant hung in the air. Someone actually gasped. For a split second, her mask slipped, raw rage flashing across her face, but she covered it fast. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said coldly. "But the community's needs outweigh one man's peculiar desires. We'll now vote on Bylaw 7C. Of course it passed. Her two cronies voted yes. A few terrified neighbors followed. Most abstained, which was as good as approval. Sam tugged my sleeve. "Let's go, John." But I didn't move. I watched Karen gather her papers, that smug little smirk forming on her lips. She looked straight at me from across the room, and that smirk widened. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't no hard feelings. It was a promise of trouble. I'd called her out in public. I'd defied her. And in Karen Granson's world, that was a declaration of war. We stepped out into the cool night air. The streetlights hummed above our quiet neighborhood, but now they felt different, sharper, watching. "You really did it this time," Sam said, but she wasn't angry. She squeezed my hand. "I'll beef up the network security when we get home." I nodded, jaw tight. I might have won the battle of words, but I knew deep down I'd just started a war, and Karen wasn't done. The question was no longer if she would retaliate, but how and when the first strike would land. The days after the HOA meeting were quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I caught myself watching the street more often, glancing out the window whenever a car passed. That prickling feeling on the back of my neck never went away. Sam called it paranoia. I called it preparation. Because Karen Granson wasn't the kind of woman who let a public challenge go unanswered. She was a planner, a schemer, and somewhere in that perfect little house of hers, she was plotting her next move. It started small, a package marked as delivered that never showed up. The morning paper, usually on my doorstep, now tossed into the bushes. Petty things. But they weren't accidents. They were signals. Little reminders that she was still out there, watching. "She's playing head games," Sam said one evening, glancing up from her laptop. Her corner of the living room looked like mission control. Monitors, cables, blinking LEDs. As a network security consultant, she could probably repel a cyber attack from space. "She's trying to get under your skin." "Well, it's working," I muttered, staring across the street at Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. "It feels like she's always out there." Sam's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Let's find out." She pulled up the feeds from our 4 exterior cameras, porch, driveway, and both sides of the house. Then she rewound the past 3 days and sped it up. And there it was. Karen's pristine white SUV. It cruised past our house 4 times on Monday, 6 times on Tuesday, and once it parked at the end of the street out for 20 whole minutes in Imam before driving away. She wasn't just passing by. She was watching us. "Okay," I said slowly. "So I'm not crazy." Sam frowned. "It's not quite stalking, but it's definitely targeted." We watched another hour of footage. Then something else caught my eye. A man, someone I didn't recognize, walking down the sidewalk. Nothing suspicious at first, but when he reached our house, he slowed down. His head turned toward the side yard. He looked at the gas meter. He paused for a few seconds. Then he kept walking. "Who's that?" I asked. Sam zoomed in, but the image was too grainy to make out a face. "I don't know," she said. "Could be anyone." But it didn't feel like anyone. Something about it was wrong. Then it hit me, like a bucket of ice water. 3 weeks earlier, we'd had a new central air unit installed. The contractors had been in and out for 2 days while we were at work. To give them access, they'd hung one of those little gray lock boxes on the gas pipe, with a spare key to the front door inside. They were supposed to come back and pick it up. They never did. My stomach dropped. "The lockbox," I whispered, already moving toward the door. "John," Sam called after me. "The key," I shouted back. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and bolted outside. The gate creaked as I swung it open. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The lockbox was still there, hanging from the pipe, untouched at first glance. I punched in the code. The lid clicked open, empty, fresh pry marks scratched across the metal face, sloppy, but professional. I stared down at it, my flashlight shaking in my hand as everything fell into place. Karen's surveillance, the strange man by the house, the repeated drive-bys. She hadn't just been watching, she'd hired someone to break in, to steal that key, copy it, and slip it back without us ever knowing. Only he'd messed up. He'd taken it and never returned it, and now she had a key to my house. The thought made my skin crawl. My home, my sanctuary, violated. Every instinct in me roared to life. Rage, fear, protection. This wasn't about bylaws or clutter anymore. This was personal. I stormed back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. "She has a key," I said, my voice shaking. "That guy took the key from the lockbox." Sam went pale. Then she spun to her computer, typing so fast her fingers blurred. "The front door has a smart lock," she said, eyes wide. "It logs every attempt, keyed or coded." She pulled up the access history, a long list of timestamps. Then she pointed at one. "Here, yesterday. 2:14 p.m. Manual key entry attempt failed. My blood ran cold. Failed? I repeated. She nodded grimly. The copy must have been bad. Whoever made it didn't get it right. But she knows that now. She'll make another one. A better one. It wasn't a relief. It was a warning. She had already tried to open my door. She had stood on my porch, key in hand, and tried to come inside. She failed this time. But Karen Granson was not the kind of woman who accepted failure. She'd be back. And next time her key would work. The line had been crossed and ground into dust. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was war. And I had no intention of losing. The old me, the quiet guy who just wanted to grill burgers and be left alone, was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone sharper, angrier. Someone ready to defend what was his. My house was my fortress, and its walls had been breached. It was time to build better ones. Maybe even a moat, a metaphorical one, filled with something deeply unpleasant for anyone foolish enough to cross it uninvited. Okay, I said, pacing the living room like a caged bear. She has a key. We can change the locks, sure, but that's just defense. That's waiting for her next move. I'm done waiting. Sam was already 10 steps ahead, her face lit by the glow of 3 monitors. Changing the locks is step 1, she said. Step 2 is proving it's her. We need undeniable proof, video timestamps, everything. We're not just stopping her, John. We're going to catch her in the act. Then she turned in her chair with that look I knew too well. The one she got whenever she said I have a beautifully devious plan. We need to let her think. She can still get in, she said. We need to bait the trap. My anger cooled into something sharper, focused. She was right. Just stopping Karen wasn't enough. We had to expose her, strip away that smug power she hid behind publicly, and for that we needed her red-handed, or as it would turn out, blue-handed. I spent hours online that night researching non-lethal home deterrence. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, satisfying as that thought might have been. I wanted humiliation. I wanted something that screamed, I was here and I shouldn't have been. Then I found it. A high-potency, non-toxic industrial marking dye. The kind banks use for security. It came in all sorts of garish colors. But one stood out, a vivid cobalt blue. The description promised it was stubbornly persistent on fabrics and skin for several days. Perfect. The next morning, I hit the hardware store. My cart was suspicious. A small plastic bucket, thin fishing line, a couple of eye hooks, and 1 factory bottle of that washable, non-toxic cobalt marking dye concentrate. No paint, no tools, just chaos ingredients. The cashier eyed my pile like he was trying to solve a crime. Big art project? He asked. Something like that, I said. Redecorating. Back in my garage, on my sacred, uninspected garage, I got to work. I was a decent carpenter, a tinkerer by nature. And this was the most satisfying project I'd taken on in years. The plan was simple, almost cartoonish in its elegance. Mount the bucket on a spring-loaded shelf just inside the top of the front door frame. Run a thin fishing line across the threshold, connected to a release pin. Door opens, line pulls pin, shelf tips, surprise shower. It was beautiful. Meanwhile, Sam was in full mission control mode. She fortified our digital defenses with 2 new high-definition cameras hardwired into a dedicated recording server with battery backup. One was obvious, mounted above the door. The other cleverly hidden inside a fake sprinkler head in the flower bed. Doorbell cam, porch cam, and sprinkler cam, she said, running cables through the wall. Timestamp synced to the second. We need every angle, she grinned. We're not just catching her. We're producing a movie. The final step was legal cover. I wasn't stupid. Even a harmless trap lived in a legal gray zone. So I covered my bases. I printed a massive warning sign on white plastic sheeting. In big, bold red letters, it read, Private property, no trespassing. All unlawful entries will be documented. Violators will be met with non-lethal deterrence. I bolted it to the wall next to the door. Ugly as sin, but impossible to miss. I even filed a report with Hilton County PD just in case. Case number printed and taped to the fridge. No one could ever claim they weren't warned. With the trap set and the sign posted, the house felt different. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a fortress waiting for a siege. We didn't change the front door lock. That was the bait. We wanted her to think her key still worked. Every night we checked the tripwire. Every morning we reviewed the camera footage. 3 days passed. Nothing. The quiet started to gnaw at me. The waiting. The silence. The doubt. Maybe she'd given up. Then came day 4. Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my phone buzzed. A message from Sam, not a text. A live feed link. My heart jumped. I tapped the link. And there she was. Karen, standing on my front porch like she owned it, clipboard in hand. That same smug smile painted across her face. Her outfit was blindingly white. White pantsuit. White heels. White handbag. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a detergent commercial. She glanced left, then right, scanning the street. She didn't see the black dome of the porch camera. She didn't see the sprinkler cam hidden in the flower bed. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My key. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling, and Her Majesty was about to meet the color blue. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Sam texted me one word. Showtime. On screen, Karen examined the new "No Trespassing" sign and sneered, like the rules were just friendly suggestions meant for lesser people. She held the key up to the sunlight, smirking as if it were Excalibur. Then she slid it into the lock. Click. It turned. The door opened. For half a second, nothing happened. Then, physics. Her foot crossed the threshold. It snagged the fishing line. The pin pulled. The spring shelf tipped, and 1 glorious gallon of highly concentrated cobalt blue dye cascaded down in a perfect, shimmering arc. It wasn't a splash. It was a wave. It hit her square on the head and shoulders. Her immaculate white pantsuit vanished beneath a flood of blue. Her perfect blonde hair instantly transformed into a vibrant Smurf helmet. The dye streamed down her face, over her clipboard, and onto her shoes, pooling on the welcome mat that, through the puddle, now ironically read, "Welcome to our home." The sprinkler cam caught everything, crystal clear, 60 frames per second. Her face was a masterpiece. Shock, confusion, rage. She opened her mouth and screamed, a high, shrill sound that probably shattered glass 2 streets over. She staggered back, slipping on the slick porch, arms flailing. Blue droplets sprayed the siding and splattered the warning sign. Her clipboard, that smug symbol of her authority, slipped from her fingers and hit the puddle with a wet slap. Justice, liquid and blue. The papers inside were instantly ruined, splattered into a giant blue Rorschach test. From the door creaking open to the scream that followed, the whole thing lasted less than 5 seconds. Sam, in her infinite wisdom, had set our cameras to record on a continuous loop. So, we had everything. Every angle. Every frame. She immediately saved the footage from multiple cameras and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. Evidence locked and loaded. But the aftermath? That was even better than the moment itself. Our comic relief neighbor, Nate, a retired gentleman who spent his days nurturing his award-winning petunias, had witnessed the entire spectacle. We caught him on the driveway camera, frozen mid-watering. His jaw dropped, his watering can slipped from his hand, and he stood there, motionless for a full 10 seconds. Then, without a word, he slowly turned, walked back inside, and shut his door. It was the kind of retreat only a man who's seen too much can manage. Meanwhile, Karen was losing it. She was sputtering, clawing at her face, trying to wipe off the blue dye, only to smear it further across her cheeks. She looked like a cartoon villain caught mid-meltdown. Then her eyes lifted, and she saw it. The camera mounted right above the door she had illegally opened. The red recording light blinked back at her like a silent accusation. Her rage flickered, replaced by a flash of pure panic. She knew. She knew she'd been caught, outsmarted, humiliated, and recorded from every possible angle. She jabbed a dripping blue finger at the camera and shrieked, "You'll regret this, Winters. You'll regret this." Then she turned and squished, off the porch, leaving a trail of bright blue footprints down the walkway and onto the pristine sidewalk of our quiet suburban street. She climbed into her spotless white SUV, smearing blue dye across the driver's door and leather seat, then peeled out with a squeal of tires. Inside the kitchen, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. It burst out as a deep, uncontrollable laugh. Sam appeared from the office, grinning ear to ear. "Did you see it?" I gasped, wiping tears from my eyes. "It was beautiful," she said, holding up her phone. "And it's already trending on the neighborhood watch page." I titled it, "Local HOA President Has a Case of the Blues." The video went viral overnight. The comments section flooded with laughing emojis and stories from neighbors who'd suffered under Karen's rule. For a few glorious hours, it felt like victory, complete and absolute. But as I rewatched the footage, my laughter faded. The look in Karen's eyes, that last glimpse before she drove off, it wasn't defeat. It was something far worse. It was the cold, calculating stare of someone who'd just found a new reason to fight. The real war hadn't ended. It had just begun. The viral fame was a double-edged sword. Sure, it was satisfying to see Karen's blue baptism shared far and wide. The poetic justice was delicious. But we had cornered a dangerous animal, and a cornered animal always fights hardest. Her humiliation didn't humble her. It ignited her. The retaliation started small, with a thump through our mail slot. A thick envelope from the Hilton County HOA. Inside, a pile of violation notices, a $500 fine for unauthorized changes to the exterior color scheme, meaning the blue splatter she'd caused herself, a $750 fine for creating a hazardous condition on a common walkway. Those were her own footprints. And my personal favorite, a $1,000 fine for harassment of a board member. The total, over $2,000 in bogus penalties. "She can't be serious," I said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. "We have video proof she trespassed." "It's not about being right," Sam said tightly. "It's about making our lives miserable. She's using the HOA's money to crush us with paperwork and legal fees." That was just the opening salvo. 3 nights later, she escalated. It was just after midnight. The house was silent until suddenly it wasn't. Everything went dark. The lights, the fridge, even the soft hum of the heater. I grabbed my phone, its glow cutting through the darkness. I checked the neighborhood outage map. Every other house had power. We were the only ones in a 5-mile radius without it. Before I could even process that, the generator in the basement kicked in with a low hum. The emergency lights flickered to life. Sam was already at her workstation running diagnostics. "The power line to the house was manually disconnected at the street box," she said grimly. "Someone had to open it and pull the breaker." The next morning, I called the power company. The woman on the phone was cheerful, until she explained that the outage had been requested by the property management company for our address. The HOA Karen had impersonated a property manager to have our power shut off in the middle of the night. This wasn't petty anymore. This was dangerous. What if we didn't have a generator? What if it had been the middle of winter? The next night, she came for our internet. We were watching a movie when the screen froze, then switched to the buffering symbol. My phone lost Wi-Fi. Sam's expression hardened. "We're being jammed," she said. She grabbed a handheld device with an antenna and swept through the house. "The signal's strongest near the front yard." I took the big mag light and followed her outside. There, buried deep in the azalea bush near the porch, was a small black box with a blinking red light. A high-powered Wi-Fi jammer. Military-grade equipment. Definitely not something you could buy at a surplus store. We bagged it with gloves, logged everything on video, and reported it to the local police and the FCC. This wasn't random. It was organized. It was personal. While I was pulling the device from the dirt, Sam's hand tightened on my arm. "John, look." A man was walking toward us from down the street. Tall, broad, built like a refrigerator, with a shaved head and a grim expression. His jacket read Gus's handyman services. "Can I help you?" I called out, stepping in front of Sam, the flashlight raised like a weapon. He stopped at the edge of our lawn, just outside the glow of the porch light. "I'm here to inspect the illegal modifications you made to your front porch. He grunted, jerking a thumb toward our door. Board president sent me. It's 1 in the morning, I said flatly. You're on private property, leave now. I've got a work order, he said, stepping onto the grass. I'm not leaving until I've done my inspection. That was it. The line snapped. My pulse roared in my ears. You take one more step onto my lawn, I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. I'm going to introduce you to the police, I said firmly. He just laughed, a short, harsh sound. The police? Karen's got them on a leash, now move. He lunged forward, not to hit me, but to push past, straight toward my porch. Instinct took over. There was no way I was letting this mountain of a man get anywhere near my wife or my home. I planted my feet and shoved him back hard. He was strong, but adrenaline gave me an edge. He stumbled, surprised I'd resisted, his face twisted with anger. You just put your hands on me, he growled, fists tightening. For a second, I thought he'd swing. We stood there on the edge of my property, locked in a silent standoff. Behind me came the sharp, unmistakable sound of Sam racking the slide on the shotgun we kept for emergencies. Muzzle down, finger clear, aimed at no one. Just a warning. Gus heard it too. His eyes flicked toward the doorway and the bravado drained right out of him. He stepped back, voice low and venomous. This isn't over. Karen always gets what she wants. He turned and lumbered down the street, swallowed by the dark. I stood there for a long time, my pulse hammering. The Wi-Fi jammer still clutched in my hand. Everything had changed. Fines, power cuts, and now someone sent to scare us on our own doorstep at 1 in the morning. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. It was a campaign meant to break us or drive us out, but they'd made a mistake. They hadn't broken us. They'd just made us angry. And they had no idea how dangerous a furious man and his even angrier tech-savvy wife could be. The confrontation with Gus was the final straw. The quiet, conflict-avoiding part of me was gone. Karen Granson wasn't just trying to annoy us anymore. She was trying to intimidate us with fear and threats. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The question, how far is too far, was already in the rearview mirror. Now there was only one question left. How do we end this for good? We sat in what used to be our cozy home office, now our command center. The room was tense, the fun of our earlier pranks long gone. She's using a proxy, Sam said, typing furiously. This Gus guy gives her deniability. We can't prove she sent him. Then we need to connect them, I said. Catch them working together, or without them knowing we're watching. Our camera system was decent, but we'd learned its weakness. If they cut the power and jammed the Wi-Fi, we were blind. That had to change. Sam, brilliant, beautiful, and a little terrifying, already had a plan. We're building a new network, she said. A ghost network. For the next 2 days, our house became a hive of preparation. Sam ordered a set of new cameras, not Wi-Fi based this time. Each ran on a 4G signal, powered by internal batteries that could last 3 days. Small, hidden, completely independent. One went inside a birdhouse on the old oak tree out front, another disguised as a rock in the flower bed. A third, with a powerful zoom lens, watched everything from the attic window, our sniper's eye view of the neighborhood. Then came the network itself, an encrypted mesh system. Unlike a single router, this one used multiple nodes that talked to each other. If one went down or got jammed, the rest rerouted the signal automatically. It was self-healing, hard to kill. Our digital fortress was ready. Now we needed bait. She's obsessed with what's inside the house, I said. The garage checks the key. She thinks we're hiding something. So let's give her something to find. The plan was simple, built on Karen's greed and curiosity. I bought a cheap fireproof safe, big, black, and official looking, and made sure anyone watching saw me carry it into the garage. With the door wide open, I made a little show of loading it. A few bricks wrapped in bubble wrap, an old laptop, a bag of bolts to give it the right weight and rattle. Then came the masterstroke, a tiny GPS-enabled RFID tracker hidden in the safe's padding. It was no bigger than a coin, battery life of a month, pinging Sam's phone every 60 seconds once activated. All that was left was to spread the rumor. That's where Nate came in. I caught him trimming his hedges the next morning. Nate, I said, leaning over the fence, can you do me a favor?
Keep an eye on the house.
With everything going on, I moved some important things home from the bank, just till this blows over. Nate's eyes went wide. Oh my, of course, John, my lips are sealed, sure they were. Nate's lips were about as sealed as a screen door in a hurricane. By lunchtime, half the neighborhood would know that John Winters had valuables locked in his garage safe. And by dinner, so would Karen. Sam called it Karen Nip. A locked box she couldn't open, rumored to be full of treasure, irresistible. That Friday, we made a show of leaving for a fancy anniversary dinner, 6 months early. Dressed up, we waved to Nate, got in the car and drove away, on smiling like everything was fine. Then we looped around and parked on a side street with a clear view of our home. Sam opened the live feed from the new 4G cameras on her tablet. Her small drone, the Wasp, hovered silently 200 feet above, giving us a perfect aerial view. The house looked quiet. Perfect bait, we waited. An hour passed. Nothing. Maybe she didn't take it, I whispered. Patience, Sam murmured. A predator always circles first. At 9:47 p.m., a dark, windowless van rolled quietly into the neighborhood. No logos, no lights. It parked a few houses down, engine cutting out. My breath caught. A moment later, the passenger door opened and a large figure stepped out. Even in the night vision feed, I recognized that lumbering gait. Gus. He moved fast, staying low, sticking to shadows. He slipped into our backyard. A camera feed flickered. He was prying open the kitchen window. Then he vanished inside. We watched, silent. 5 minutes later, the back door opened again. Gus emerged, dragging something heavy. The decoy safe. He wrestled it across the lawn, loaded it into the van, and drove off without a sound. My first reaction was rage. He'd broken into my home. But then Sam raised her phone. On the screen, a map glowed, a tiny blue dot blinking and moving down the main road. Got him, she said, smiling grimly. Trackers live. The trap had been sprung. Now all we had to do was follow the breadcrumbs. The adrenaline from the break-in carried us through the night. We didn't sleep, couldn't really. Our office had transformed into a full-blown war room. Sam projected the live map from the RFID tracker onto the main wall. There it was, a tiny blue dot pulsing steadily. Our stolen safe on the move. I'd taken over the whiteboard, scribbling notes, drawing lines, connecting the web of names, faces, and evidence that formed the shadow of Karen Granson's little empire. This wasn't a neighborhood feud anymore. It was an investigation. The first clue was the tracker itself. The safe didn't go to Gus's place or some random storage unit like we'd guessed. Instead, the blue dot crossed town and stopped in a rundown commercial strip, known for its bail bonds offices and all-night check-cashing joints. It stopped moving at one specific address. Sam typed it in. The search results popped up immediately. Honest Abe's Pawn and Loan, we buy anything. I smirked. He took it straight to a pawn shop. Couldn't even wait a day. He's not just a thug. He's a dumb thug. By morning, we were parked across the street from Honest Abe's before it even opened. The place looked exactly like every shady pawn shop in every bad movie. Iron bars on the windows, flickering neon sign, the faint smell of desperation. We watched as a greasy man with a ponytail unlocked the door. Gave him 30 minutes to get his coffee, then walked in. The air inside was thick with dust and stale cologne. The man behind the counter, presumably Abe himself, eyed us warily. Can I help you? I gave him my friendliest, most harmless smile. Good morning. We're here about a safe, Black Sentry brand, brought in last night by a very large gentleman. Abe's expression froze. Don't know what you're talking about. Without a word, Sam set her phone on the counter and pressed play. The hidden birdhouse camera footage rolled so crystal clear. Gus's face illuminated by our porch light, then the unmistakable image of him dragging the safe across our lawn. This is a recording of a felony burglary, Sam said. Calm as a detective. That safe is our property, and it contains a live GPS tracker that led us right here. Now you have two options. You can cooperate. We take back what's ours and this all goes away. Or we leave, call Hilton County PD, and they show up with a warrant and footage of you receiving stolen property. Your call. Abe swallowed hard. His eyes darted from the phone to our faces. Then he sighed. Follow me. In the back room there it was, our decoy safe, sitting on a shelf between a dusty saxophone and a pile of old power tools. Abe filled out a property release form, handed over the safe, and even copied his security footage to a second drive for the police. It was perfect. Gus, in full view, dragging in the safe, exchanging cash. We had him cold, but Gus was just the muscle. We needed to connect this directly to Karen. That's when Sam remembered the die trap video. Back home, she pulled up the high-resolution file. "Watch the clipboard," she said, scrubbing frame by frame through the moment the blue die exploded. In slow motion, we saw it, a perfect spatter of cobalt blue landing not just on Karen's shirt, but on the corner of the leather-bound daily planner she carried everywhere. A distinct starburst-shaped stain, unique, identifiable, a fingerprint. "That's good," I said, "but how do we prove she still has it?" Sam grinned. "Because our dear HOA president loves attention." She opened the HOA's official Facebook page, Karen's digital shrine to herself. Photo after photo of ribbon cuttings, flower plantings, fake smiles. Sam scrolled back a few days, and there it was. A photo from a charity bake sale 2 days earlier. Karen beaming, planner in hand, and right on the corner. Barely visible but unmistakable was that same blue starburst stain. We had her. Now we just needed the human element. Proof she'd been running this racket for years. For 2 days, I went door to door talking to neighbors. Most were scared to even open up. They didn't want trouble. But then I met Mrs. Gable, a sweet widow from the next street over. When I told her what had happened to us, she started crying. She said Karen had forced an attic inspection last winter. Gus had gone up alone and found code violations that cost her $3,000 in fake repairs. She was too embarrassed and afraid to tell anyone. That broke something in the neighborhood. Once Mrs. Gable agreed to sign a statement, others followed. A young couple fined $1,000 because their toddler's tricycle was left on the driveway for 2 hours. A man forced to tear down a brand new deck because Karen decided his stain color was too rustic. By the end, we had 6 notarized statements, sworn accounts of bullying, extortion, intimidation. We laid everything out on the whiteboard. The burglary footage, the tracker data leading to the pawn shop's own surveillance video, the planner with the blue stain linking Karen to the crime. And finally, the witness testimonies showing a pattern of abuse. It was airtight. We could have taken it straight to the police, but Sam stopped me. "They'll file a report," she said, "and it'll sit in bureaucracy for months. Karen needs to be removed now." She pulled out the thick HOA binder, flipped through the dusty pages, and pointed to a clause I'd never noticed. Article 9, emergency removal of a board member. If 25% of homeowners signed a petition, it triggered a mandatory recall meeting. It was time to take the fight to the clubhouse. Getting a quarter of the homeowners to sign was like trying to nail jelly to a tree. People were afraid and terrified of retaliation, of fines, of losing privileges. But fear cuts both ways, and so does anger. And once Mrs. Gable's story spread, fear turned into fury. We needed 40 signatures. We got 62. For the first time in weeks, I felt something new, hope. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting back. Sam drafted the official notice for the emergency recall meeting, citing the bylaw and the purpose of the vote. We posted it right on the community bulletin board, directly over the flyer for Karen's upcoming patriotic pet parade. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. When the evening came, the beige clubhouse was unrecognizable, packed wall-to-wall, standing room only. The air was thick with tension, the kind of quiet rebellion you could almost feel humming in your chest. People who'd never shown up to a meeting before stood along the walls, arms crossed, eyes hard. Sam and I took our seats in the front row. Nate gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the room. Mrs. Gable sat near the aisle, flanked by a few other seniors who looked equal parts scared and defiant. Karen and her 2 loyal lapdogs, Barry and Linda, sat at the head table. She looked flustered, caught off guard by the turnout. She banged the gavel, trying to hide her nerves. "Welcome to this unscheduled gathering," she began, voice tight. "Due to a frivolous and frankly misguided petition, we are legally obligated to hold this meeting. Let's get this nonsense over with." I stood. According to the bylaws, Karen, the petitioners speak first. The room fell quiet as I walked to the podium. The stack of papers in my hand felt heavier than stone. Every eye followed me. "My name is John Winters," I began, steady and clear. "And for the past month, my family has been targeted by our HOA president. We've been stalked, harassed, and robbed, and we are not the only ones." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Karen shot up from her seat. That is a slanderous accusation. You have no proof. Oh, I have proof, I said calmly. But first, I want to remind everyone why we're here. This board has forgotten who it works for. It doesn't serve Karen Granson's ego, it serves the homeowners. And when the board uses our rules and money to intimidate and extort the very people it represents, it breaks our trust. Karen slammed her gavel. Point of order. This is not a trial. State your reason for the recall or sit down. I ignored her. Mrs. Gable, I said gently, would you be willing to share what happened to you? The elderly woman rose from her chair, trembling but determined. In a soft, steady voice, she told her story. About the forced attic inspection, the so-called violations, the $3,000 cash payment to Gus, and the fear that kept her silent. When she finished, the room went dead silent. Then, from the back, someone shouted, "Shame!" The dam broke. Voices erupted. Neighbors calling out their own stories, the fines, the threats, the constant surveillance. The room buzzed with anger, years of quiet resentment spilling into the open. Karen's face drained of color. Her mask of authority cracked. She looked trapped and desperate. Then she made her move. She glanced toward the back of the room and a massive figure stepped from the shadows. Gus! This meeting is out of control, Karen shouted. This man is a threat to the board's safety. Gus, escort Mr. Winters out, but Gus hesitated. A room full of furious homeowners stared him down. He looked at me, then at Karen, unsure. Get him out, she shrieked. He reached for my arm, and then a cane hooked around his ankle. It was Nate. Even he looked surprised as Gus stumbled forward, tripping hard into a table stacked with coffee and powdered donuts. The crash echoed through the hall. Chaos erupted. Barry lunged to help Gus, only to be shoved by quiet, timid Dave, the same man who'd been too scared to speak at the first meeting. Linda started screaming. Coffee splashed everywhere. It was an all-out suburban riot, and I just stood there at the podium watching the entire HOA revolt in real time. The recall was no longer in question. Karen had lost the room, lost control, and lost her power. By the time order was restored, the vote had been scheduled, 10 days from now, at the annual neighborhood block party. As the crowd dispersed, Karen pushed her way through the room until she stood inches from me. Her face was twisted with fury. Her eyes burned like embers. You think you've won? She hissed. You have no idea what's coming, Winters. This isn't over. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And looking into her eyes, I knew. She meant it. The days leading up to the vote felt poisoned. Karen's threat hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud. The block party, normally a day of bouncy castles and barbecues, had become the setting for an impending showdown. We knew she was planning something. We had to be ready. Sam turned our home office into Resistance headquarters. Late-night strategy meetings filled our living room, neighbors whispering like conspirators plotting our next move. Sam's plan was bold, theatrical, and brilliant. She called it Operation More Blue. She wants to play dirty, Sam said, pointing at a map of the block party layout on our whiteboard. So we're going to drown her in it publicly, with 100 witnesses and 12 cameras. It was a large-scale version of the original die trap. We picked 4 houses with second-story porches overlooking the main square, where the voting table would be set. The homeowners, all victims of Karen's tyranny, volunteered without hesitation. In my garage, I built 4 identical remote-controlled tipping bucket rigs, an upgrade from my first fishing line prototype. Each held 5 gallons of the same cobalt blue dye, hidden behind porch railings, invisible from the ground. Sam synchronized them all to a single wireless trigger, a big red button hidden beneath our barbecue table. But her real genius was the broadcast. She set up a private live stream with a unique URL and shared it with local news outlets, community bloggers, and every HOA member. Tune in at 2 p.m. sharp, she wrote, for a special announcement regarding the recall vote. She mounted cameras everywhere, on porches, in birdhouses, even in a garden gnome. Overhead, the Wasp drone would capture everything from above. On the day of the block party, the air was thick with tension and barbecue smoke. Kids bounced in inflatable castles, blissfully unaware that the adults were gearing up for war. At 1:55 p.m., Karen arrived. She wasn't alone. Gus, Barry, and Linda flanked her like bodyguards. They moved through the crowd, glaring, muttering threats. trying to scare people away from the ballot table. I stood behind the grill, flipping burgers, my hand resting on the red button beneath the table. Cameras are live. Sam's voice buzzed in my earpiece. Streams at 500 viewers and climbing. Wasp is overhead. Bucket team's ready. Karen's group reached the center of the street, right beneath the hidden rigs. They're in position, I whispered. Karen slammed her hand down on the ballot table. This entire vote is illegal, she barked. This is a sham. That was my cue. I looked toward Sam's window. She gave me a sharp nod. I pressed the button. Above us, 4 solenoids clicked in unison, and 20 gallons of cobalt blue dye poured from the sky. The torrent hit dead center. Karen, Gus, Barry, and Linda were instantly soaked, head to toe in brilliant blue. The crowd gasped. For one perfect second, the entire neighborhood froze, staring at the dripping, stunned figures in disbelief. Then someone laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. Laughter swept through the crowd, pure and unstoppable. There they stood, 4 drenched villains in a widening puddle of blue, like they'd just gone 12 rounds with a paint factory. The rebellion was complete. It wasn't just laughter. It was a wave of pure, cathartic release, the sound of 100 people finally breaking free from fear. Karen stood there sputtering, blue dye dripping from her nose. Gus just looked dazed, like he couldn't understand how the sky itself had turned against him. As the laughter rolled through the crowd and the live stream viewer count soared into the thousands, 2 Hilton County police cruisers glided silently up the street. Detective Miller stepped out, holding a folder and a calm authority that cut through the chaos. These weren't random arrests. They were long overdue. I'd briefed him days earlier, told him that things might get loud around 2 p.m. I walked over and handed him a flash drive. Everything you need is on there, I said. Backups too. Copies are already in evidence. Video of the break-in, the pawn shop transaction, witness statements, extortion reports, notarized testimony. It's all there. Miller looked at the soaked, sputtering blue figures, then down at the flash drive. He shook his head with a smirk. John, he said, you don't do anything halfway, do you? Right there in the middle of the street, in front of all her neighbors and thousands watching online, the officers cuffed a screaming, blue-stained Karen. It was over. We had won. But as they led her to the car, she twisted around and locked eyes with me. There was no fear, no regret, only pure burning hatred, the kind that promised this wasn't over. The neighborhood dubbed it the Blue Apocalypse. With Karen, Gus, and the cronies drenched in dye and buried under evidence, Hilton County's HOA empire collapsed overnight. While Karen was being booked, the recall vote passed almost unanimously. The old board was gone. An interim board stepped in. And to my surprise, I was part of it.
Our first motion, void every fine Karen's board had issued in the last year and refund every dollar from reserves. Passed, no objections. The cheer that followed shook the ceiling tiles. Months later, after hearings and depositions, the criminal case is wrapped up. Gus flipped for a lighter sentence. Barry and Linda faced civil suits from half the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable led the charge. They sold their homes, disappeared, and no one missed them. Karen faced a wall of evidence and witnesses. She took a plea deal, jail time, probation, heavy fines, and a 5-year ban from any HOA board in the county. We did it. We fought the system and won. We tore down a petty little empire, brick by brick. The change was instant. Fear drained away, replaced by chatter, laughter, and the smell of backyard grills. Neighbors trimmed hedges together. Potlucks bloomed like spring flowers. The block party that almost became a riot ended up stitching the community back together. Then came the tribute. Little blue-painted garden gnomes started popping up on lawns. The Gnome Guard. Nate started it. And soon, 100 tiny grinning faces lined our street. It was funny, but it meant something. A promise. We watch out for each other. Life finally felt normal again. Sam and I got the peace we'd moved here for. Coffee tasted better. The grass grew without a warning letter. Could work in my garage without looking over my shoulder. Sometimes I thought about how far we'd come. The traps, the cameras, the petitions, the sting. I hadn't asked for a war, but when it came to my doorstep, I made sure to finish it. We protected our home and our people. That feeling goes deep. A few months later, as the sunset bathed the neighborhood in gold, I grabbed the mail and closed the box, but my hand stuck slightly. I looked down. Cobalt blue smeared my thumb. My stomach dropped. I leaned in. On the metal handle, pressed perfectly into the wet blue smear, was a single clean fingerprint. Not mine. Too small for Gus or Karen, and Karen was locked up. The envelope slipped from my hands and hit the driveway. The air felt suddenly colder. The blue wasn't random. It was deliberate. A message. Someone had been here. Someone connected to everything we thought was over. We'd cut off the head but missed a fang. The war was over. We'd won the peace. But that cobalt print said otherwise. One more round might be waiting for us. I went inside. Sam was already at her desk, sharp as ever. "Mailbox cam," she said. We rolled it back, frame by frame. She paused, zoomed in, and pointed at the screen. "That print wasn't accidental," she said quietly. "It was placed."
Oh.
I looked up at the reflection in the window, a row of tiny blue gnomes smiling in the fading light. Game on.